Once upon a time, there was a great savanna in North Africa, a Serengeti sandwiched between the Mediterranean Sea and the Sahara Desert. In today's video, we're going to get a glimpse of what that landscape would have looked like, but with only a pale shadow of the species richness that once existed here. But I'll also discuss an idea barely even considered for this part of the world, an idea which could see a healthy ecosystem one day return to this lost Eden. Just a short video today. I'm actually filming this in February of 2025 and I'm going to keep it in reserve for a time when I need something to cover me over, when I don't have anything to show. This fence that I'm leaning against marks the boundary to Bou Hedma National Park in central Tunisia. It's an arid savanna climate. And it gives a glimpse into what this part of Africa was once like centuries ago. The park is tiny, it's probably not even 20 square kilometers, but it does contain some of the animal life which would have been present in abundance long ago and still is present in other parts of Africa. I am outside the park wandering along the fence because people are not allowed in. I tried to get in, I tried to sweet talk with my non-existent French, the guy at the official gate, and he was having none of it. Then another guy came along a little bit later and said, no, the park is so small, it's just for research. And I kind of tried to even argue with him as well, because I am a qualified ecologist and I do know a lot about animal behavior, and I know that small numbers of tourists, if they were allowed in for a fee, the local people would earn some money and the park wouldn't be overly disturbed if they had to stick to particular trails or something like that, because that's what happens in other parts of the world. The animals become accustomed to people, and as long as the people are quiet and their numbers are restricted, it should be okay. But there's such a marked difference between what's on that side of the fence, where you've got acacia trees and lots of wildflowers, and you've got this cacophony of finches coming from the protected canopies of the acacias over there. And out here, which is much quieter, there's a few young olive trees. There's actually lots of wildflowers right now in and outside the park, because there's been a fair amount of rain lately. There's no large animals to see at the moment, although I did see some earlier on when I first drove along the fence. I saw some antelopes, and I'm using that as a catch-all term because I'm pretty sure they're not simply antelopes, but my knowledge of ungulates is not good enough to distinguish between oryxes and antelopes and this sort of stuff. I know some of the species in southern Africa, but here I'm pretty hazy. And there were a whole bunch of ostriches running around. Looked like they were lecking, which is what birds do when males try to show off to the females by waving themselves around or doing some kind of display. One of the most famous examples are the birds of paradise. And then the females look on, although some of them were getting a bit overexcited and chasing the females like crazy. They have drifted further back into the park now as well. If you're a habitual watcher of my videos, you'll have heard me banging on about rewilding in the past. And this place, because it's a tantalizing, teeny tiny little glimpse of a North African savanna, I can't help but think that if this ethos of rewilding, rather than simply preserving this tiny fragment, which is what they have done, why not expand it? There's no reason that rewilding as an ethos cannot be taken to other places, including parts of Africa, which have suffered from protected areas being too small in some cases and vulnerable to degradation. So for example, if you were to greatly increase the size of the park and allow in rhinos and even something like elephants and possibly apex predators, if you made the fence big and strong enough, then you would be able to have a sustainable operation there, which, if managed correctly, could really benefit the local community. They would financially benefit much more from the money coming from tourists than they would from the subsistence farming that they're doing here now, which does not yield very well in this kind of climate. But then conservation is very low down the priorities list in countries like this. People are struggling to make ends meet a lot of the time, and poverty is extensive. So I can understand why people wouldn't want to change things, because it would temporarily mean more hardship for people. But at the same time, people do manage to coexist here with flocks of sheep and goats and so forth when there are African wolves wandering around. I heard them when I was in the wilderness a couple of nights ago. That video is on the channel from a few months back. So maybe if the financial benefits were enough, then you could galvanize people into supporting these kinds of endeavors, and they might do well from it, as would the ecology. It would be wonderful to resurrect the lost ecosystems of North Africa. After all, we know that North Africa once upon a time was much like Southern Africa is today in places like the Serengeti. Tunisia, where I am now, was in Roman times the kingdom of Carthage. And we know that Hannibal, who led that kingdom, came closer than anybody else in its entire history to sacking Rome. And he used African elephants, tamed African elephants, as part of his military arsenal. And he didn't go south of the equator to get those. They were wandering around here, and given enough space, they could wander around here again. If the area set aside was big enough, you would then have a robust North African ecosystem that would mirror the kind of thing that you see in the south. And it would just be wonderful. Imagine being able to go on safari here. So that's my take. I wouldn't expect a country like Tunisia socially to be ready for that sort of idea yet, but it's important, I think, to plant a seed that some people might see. Some people who are from Tunisia might be watching this and think, you know, that might make ecological and economic sense, especially when you consider the fact that a lot of the national parks in southern Africa are overrun with tourists. They're loving them to death. So if you had a network of national parks in northern Africa, which are much cheaper and easier to get to from Europe, then that would potentially relieve some of the pressure down in the south. Anyway, that's my take. I think that we should have more wilderness in the world, even if it has to be carefully restored to as close its original natural state as we can coexist with it, and maybe that will become a reality sometime in the future. Of course, with climate change, we don't know if this area is going to completely turn to desert in time. Maybe it won't be able to sustain that sort of ecosystem, but Nothing is certain. I remain optimistic. Like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you soon.